dark and difficult times lie ahead. Soon we must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy.
Ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, innies, outers and in-betweeners, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to go through the National Police Chief Council and College of Policing's guidelines that were published on the 31st of March 2020, it's just a few days ago, with regards to the government legislation surrounding coronavirus. We all know that many police constables have been abusing the powers. In many places, fines have been dished out like sweets in a playground, and people have been getting fined quite heftily, in my opinion, for not even breaking or breaching any of the guidance. And remember, most of this is guidance, and that's very important to know. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into this. I'm going to try and keep this video as short as I possibly can, but I am going to read through every page for those people that have got poor eyesight, and that way everybody gets to know exactly what's being said and shared. This is what is being shared with police forces across the country. Okay, so this is the newest, most up-to-date guidelines for police on dealing with people during this coronavirus situation. So page 1 is literally just an introduction, and it says the response to coronavirus is evolving. We are learning more as the situation develops, and we will brief you again in due course. This briefing is to get the most up-to-date information out to you as quickly as we can, but it is subject to change. Well, there's no surprise there, National Police Chiefs Council or the College of Policing. Nothing quite like moving the goalposts when you need to. Page 2 just covers a brief explanation of what the document covers. So it says this pack covers the health protection coronavirus restrictions England regulations, reconciling powers in relation to business closures with powers to disperse gatherings and restrictions on movement. We are producing another briefing on the Coronavirus Act, providing powers relating to potentially infectious persons and powers to the Secretary of State to issue directions relating to events, gatherings and premises. This will be published by the 3rd of April 2020. I will, of course, endeavour to get my hands on that as well, guys. So if and when I get hold of that, I will make a similar video to this one. Page 3 of the guidance. The Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulations 2020. The regulations came into force on the 26th of March 2020 and apply to England only. Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have equivalent legislation. The purpose of these new powers is to save lives by protecting the public and the NHS. The regulations provide powers to a relevant person to require the closure of premises and businesses, restrict movement and gatherings. A relevant person is defined in Regulation 8 as a constable, a PCSO or a person designated by the Secretary of State for the purposes of the regulation. Regulation 12 states that the regulations will expire at the end of a period of 6 months, beginning with the day they came into force. The need for the restrictions or requirements imposed by these regulations will be reviewed by the Secretary of State at least once every 21 days, with the first review carried out by the 16th of April 2020. This will be an ever-changing picture, and everyone in policing is encouraged to follow developments closely. So what that's saying is although this will be in effect for 6 months, every 21 days they can change it to suit their needs. So it's not that these regulations now are in place and will be in place for 6 months. It simply means that overall there will be regulations, but the content of those regulations is liable to change every 21 days. Page 4 states that government guidance sets out these social distancing measures and includes the following. Stay at home unless shopping for basic necessities, for example food and medicine, taking exercise alone or with members of a household, for any medical need or to provide care to a vulnerable person, travelling for work purposes but only where they cannot work from home. Also, to stop all public gatherings of more than 2 people unless these people live together, the gatherings are essential for a work purpose, They are providing assistance to a vulnerable person, providing emergency assistance, participating in legal proceedings, or moving house where this could not be rearranged. And to stop all social events, including weddings, baptisms, and other religious ceremonies. Funerals attended by immediate family, or where there is none, close friends are still permitted. A vulnerable person is defined as anyone aged 70 or older, anyone aged under 70 who has an underlying health condition, or anyone who is pregnant. Please forgive the banging, that's the upstairs neighbours again. Now, something that does concern me about all of this is the fact that they use guidance and regulations and rules in the same context, and they're not. Guidance is advice or information aimed at resolving a problem or difficulty, especially as given by someone in authority. Okay, so advice or information can obviously be accepted or rejected. We are under no obligation to accept anybody's advice or information. Rules, on the other hand, are a set of explicit or understood regulations or principles governing conduct or procedure within a particular area of activity. Now, how can you have advice that's an explicit or understood regulation? The two contradict each other, and this whole regulations and stuff that the police are giving out just is rife with this contradiction, which just makes it very difficult for anybody to understand. But clearly, guidance is advice or information aimed at resolving a problem. Rules or regulations are a set of explicit or understood regulations or principles governing conduct or procedure within a particular area of activity. And as I say, that particularly worries me. Page 5 explains the 4-step escalation principles, and I like the way they call it a 4-step escalation principles because the police generally do escalate most situations. But the police response will be to follow the 4-step escalation principles, which are engage, explain, encourage, enforce, supposedly. We police by consent. The initial police response should be to encourage voluntary compliance. This could be through asking individuals, groups or businesses whether they have heard about the new guidance and how quickly they can comply with it. This should be done by stressing the risks to public health and the NHS. In other words, making people feel guilty. There is no power to stop and account. Very important. The police cannot simply stop you and ask you to account for yourself. The police will apply the law in a system that is flexible, discretionary and pragmatic. Well, flexible and discretionary for the police means that they can bend it to the point of snapping and get away with it. This will enable officers to make sensible decisions and employ their judgment. Enforcement should be a last resort. Well, that's something that we certainly haven't been seeing over the past week or so. Page 6 starts. There are two main parts to these regulations. 1. Regulations affecting permitted retail premises and businesses, and 2. Those relating to individuals affecting movement and gatherings. Local authorities, mainly through their environmental health and trading standards officers, will lead on enforcing and monitoring the closure of business premises and will be able to issue prohibition notices. You should support them with this where required, and senior officers will need to liaise with your local authorities to agree the ways in which this will be implemented locally. The police's main focus is the regulations relating to individuals, and therefore we have structured this briefing to make regulations relating to individuals the most prominent. Now, it's nice to see the police using their corporate side in order to shut down businesses. I would have thought that environmental health, trading standards, visiting these premises and offering fines if they're open and they shouldn't be, I would have thought that would be enough. Not quite sure why the police feel they need to get involved, unless of course it's to do what they did, as you probably saw in the last PAP reports from the 2nd of April. Now, strangely enough, they've literally just finished that last page with the fact that the police's main focus is on individuals. But yet the very next page talks about the powers relating to closure of retail businesses and premises. Enforcement of these closures or restrictions will be through service of a prohibition notice to the relevant person who it is reasonably believed is contravening the restrictions, and where it is necessary and proportionate, to prevent the continued contravention. What is allowed? The sale of food and drink for consumption off premises. Workplace canteens where there is no practical alternative. Room service. Using premises for broadcast to people outside. Using premises for blood donation. Providing accommodation for the homeless. Using a place of worship for funerals attended by immediate family or where there are none close friends. To broadcast an act of worship to people outside. Or to provide essential voluntary services. Crematoriums for small gatherings. Food retailers including food markets, supermarkets, convenience stores, off licenses and corner shops. Pharmacies and drugstores. Newsagents. Homeware, building supplies and hardware stores. Petrol stations. Car repair and MOT services. Taxi or vehicle hire businesses. Banks and building societies, post offices, funeral directors, laundrettes and dry cleaners, dental services, opticians, audiology services, chiropody, chiropractors, osteopaths and other medical or health services, including services relating to mental health. Thank God. Veterinary surgeries and pet shops, storage and distribution facilities including delivery drop-off points, car parks in towns and cities, public toilets, bicycle shops, agricultural supply shops. Those are the kind of businesses that are allowed to operate. Now we move on to what is not allowed and the powers relating to closure of retail businesses and premises. These are exceptions to the previous slide unless specifically identified in the list of businesses and premises that must close, they must remain open. Certain businesses can continue to offer goods for sale or hire from a shop, including library services, provided these are through a website or otherwise by online communication, by telephone including orders by text message or by post. However, these businesses must stop admitting people to their premises who are not involved in the business. So these are places that are serving food or drink to be consumed on the premises. Cinemas, theatres, nightclubs, bars and licensed premises, bingo halls, concert halls, museums and galleries, casinos, betting shops, spas, barbers and nail, beauty and hair salons, massage parlours. Damn it, I was hoping to go and see my Filipino friend for a back rub. Indoor skating rinks, tattoo parlours, car showrooms, auction houses, indoor fitness studios, gyms, swimming pools, bowling alleys, amusement arcades, soft play areas and other indoor leisure centres or facilities. I presume that includes brothels. Fun fairs, whether outdoors or indoors. Playgrounds, sports courts and outdoor gyms. Outdoor markets except for stalls selling food. The provision of holiday accommodation unless the accommodation is being used by someone who was a resident before the regulations came into force and are unable to go home, as someone's main residence, to support services to the homeless, to host blood donation sessions, or for any other purpose requested by the Secretary of State or local authority. Now we move on to the powers in relation to restriction on movement and gatherings. If you believe someone is outside of the place where they are living without reasonable excuse, you can direct that person to return to the place where they are living, give the person concerned any reasonable instructions you consider to be necessary, use reasonable force in the exercise of the power to remove the person to the place where they are living. A bit like when you was a child and you was told to go to your bedroom and you wouldn't go, and your mum or dad would take you by the arm and drag you up the stairs. That's essentially what they are giving themselves the power to do. You may instruct gatherings of 3 or more people to disperse or direct or remove any person from that gathering to their home where they are not members of the same household. Anyone contravening these requirements commits an offence punishable on summary conviction by a fine. Where someone is believed to have committed an offence, believed, not proven, but believed to have committed an offence under these regulations and is 18 or over, you may issue them with a fine for £60. Payable within 28 days, but this is reduced to £30 if paid within 14 days. Court proceedings may be brought in cases of non-payment If a person commits an offence for the second occasion, the penalty increases to 120. The penalty will double for each subsequent issue, capped at 960. So in other words, your third infraction, shall we say, would cost you 240. Your next would cost you 480. Page 10. Restrictions on movement. During the pandemic, nobody should leave their home unless they have a reasonable excuse. And thankfully and luckily, we're given a list of reasonable excuses. I would suggest that reasonable excuses may be slightly different for different people. Therefore, to give a list of reasonable excuses, I think is a bit ridiculous. Although some of them make perfect sense, I still think that giving a list of reasonable excuses, the police will base all of their actions on this particular list. So if somebody gives an excuse that's not on this reasonable excuse list, then they won't take it as a reasonable excuse. Because we know that police are very bad at using their own minds. Anyway, reasonable excuses include obtaining basic necessities and supplies for the essential upkeep, maintenance and functioning of the household, or for the household of a vulnerable person, obtaining money from any business permitted to remain open, to take exercise alone or with other members of the household, seeking medical assistance, providing emergency assistance, providing care or assistance to a vulnerable person, travelling for the purpose of work or to provide voluntary or charitable services where it is not reasonably possible to work from or provide those services from home, attending the funeral of a close family member or friend where there are no close family, donating blood, meeting a legal obligation including court or bail conditions, answering bail and complying with other offender management, accessing critical public services, continuing existing arrangements relating to shared parental access to children, going to a place of worship, however that's only for the minister of religion or worship leader only, moving house, or to avoid injury or escape a risk of harm. Now, my problem is, I do have mental health issues myself, and if I don't have my cigarettes or my vape, for example, and I need to go and get that, I will go and get that. That to me is essential. Otherwise, I will sit here without one and I will go absolutely mental. All right? So to me, that is essential. To the police, they probably wouldn't see that as essential, especially one that doesn't smoke, for example. However, I imagine, and I'm pretty certain, that the police will use this list as a start and stop of the only reasonable excuses, where it does say that the reasonable excuses include the following, which means obviously there are others. But again, police don't like to use their brains very much, do they, other than what they're told to do and say. Page 11, the restrictions on gatherings. No gatherings in a public place of more than 2 people are permitted unless those people live together. The gathering is essential for a work purpose. The gathering is a funeral. Those people are, where necessary, moving house, helping a vulnerable person, participating in legal proceedings, or helping in an emergency. It's a very concise and straight to the point rules there, isn't there? That doesn't really give any scope to move for the public, and that's good, I think. Again, there needs to be set rules. Guidelines mean that people can abuse it. Rules, if you have, as it quite clearly says here, no gatherings in a public place of more than 2 people are permitted. So it's not saying use your discretion, or if you believe, this is a statement and that is it. And that is a good thing. That, for me, with regards to the social distancing and things like that, I think that is a good idea. Page 12, I found quite interesting. This is about children and young persons. And remember, this is guidance to the police. This is what the police are being told in their briefings before they go out on shift for the last couple of days. Okay, so this is their new operations manual, if you like, regarding this coronavirus regulations. If you believe anyone is outside of their premises without reasonable excuse, including a child, as in someone under 18 years of age, you can Direct that person to return to the place they are living. Remove that person to the place where they are living. Give the person concerned any reasonable instructions you consider to be necessary. Use reasonable force in the exercise of your power. So the police are being given the power to lay hands on our children and bring them home. I'm not happy about that. The power also applies to an individual over 18 accompanying a child if applicable. Your powers extends to direct anyone who has responsibility for the child, even if temporary, to secure compliance with the regulations. If you are dealing with a parent or guardian who is not preventing their child going outdoors and all other avenues to engage, explain and encourage have been exhausted, you should enforce by issuing them with a fine. Now that's all well and good, but there are a lot of kids out there who are complete and utter bastards. You know, I'm talking about the kids that get away with everything, or were able to get away with whatever they wanted. Do you know what I mean? Spoke to their parents like shit and, you know, all that kind of stuff. They're hardly going to listen to their parents. They're hardly going to care that their parents are getting a fine. And what do you want the parents to do? Lock them in their room so you can come around and arrest them and take the kids off them for child abuse. This whole engage, explaining, encourage ridiculousness. I just don't see the police using it. You might find some that will engage and explain and encourage, but from what I've seen so far, the police just ignore all that stuff. I mean, that's common sense. It's common sense to engage with a member of the public, explain to them, although the police don't understand it themselves, so that would have been difficult to explain, and encourage them. But no, we see police, or we've seen police going out dishing out fines like sweets and playground. So I would be very interested to see how many less videos we're getting of the police abusing these regulations and the powers that have been bestowed on them. Page 13, and this is quite interesting to me. Recording. These are non-recordable offences. They cannot be punished by imprisonment. Now what I'm taking from that is what we've just spoke about, the being in a group of people, having a business open, going out when you shouldn't be, going places where you shouldn't be. They are not recordable offences and they cannot be punished by imprisonment. It is literally only finable offence. The only prison comes if you fail to pay your fines. It says that a record is not required on forced record management systems, which means that they can get away with abusing this without having to record the number of people they've stopped, the number of people they've fined, the reason for the stop. All of that stuff doesn't have to be recorded on the management system. But also, crucially, biometrics are not required to be taken. So if you are arrested because you failed to give your name, or you're a child and they're going to use some protection, vulnerable person act or something like that, then when you are taken to a police station, they are not allowed to take biometrics. They're not allowed to take your fingerprint. They're not allowed to take DNA. They're not allowed to take any of that. So that's something to bear in mind in case you end up in a police station and they try to do that. The powers of arrest. A power of arrest may be utilised in line with section 24 of PACE. Officers' attention is specifically drawn to the necessity to arrest in relation to ascertaining name and address. That, to me, seems to be pointing out to the police that that's their go-to. Yeah, that will be their go-to arrest clause, shall we say, for people that they don't like, for people that they feel are not bowing down to their authority. And we have seen that. Now, something I've said in a recent video as well is that if you say nothing, which you're completely entitled to do, if you say absolutely nothing, if you do not speak or engage with the police whatsoever, then the onus to prove that you are doing something that is contravening these regulations, should we say, is on them. And they can't reasonably prove that if you don't give them any evidence that you are. So if you're stopped and you stay completely quiet, as is your right, then for them to get to the point of arresting you to ascertain your name and address, they have to have a reasonable belief that you are contravening these regulations. If you tell them where you've been and where you're going, and they don't, and in their belief that is not an essential place to be going, then they can demand your name and address, right, and get your details off you. Whereas if you stay completely quiet, you're not giving them anything for them to use against you, and you are completely allowed to say nothing, unless it gets to the point where they're going to fine you, at which point, you know, you're pretty much going to have to give your details, a bit like under Section 50 of the Police Reform Act, or a bit like when you're driving a motor vehicle under 164 and 165 of the Road Traffic Act. It's not something they're going to let you get away with, is what I'm getting at. So they will end up arresting you if it gets to the point where they say, right, I'm going to give you a fine. But reasonably, it can only get to that point if you give them any information that can give them a reason to believe that you are contravening these regulations. It goes on to say that the power of arrest may be utilised to protect a child or other vulnerable person from the person in question. Now that also means, from what I can tell, is if a person is out with a child, as this is talking about protecting a child or vulnerable person from the person in question, I'm assuming that that means that if you are a parent and there's a child with you and you're out and about and they don't believe your story, then they could take that child away from you to protect that child. But they're using it, as it says, in this context, this aspect is linked to the spread of infection. Officers may also wish to determine if they feel breach of the peace powers apply. And I don't see how breach of the peace powers could apply if you're out somewhere walking down the road, or if you're doing your exercise. But as we all know, breach of the peace powers is another one of their go-tos, because all you've got to do is argue with them. All you've got to do is raise your voice a little bit because they're winding you up, which they're trained to do, and they can have you for breach of the peace. Goes on to say officers' attention is drawn to the expanded grounds of necessity for arrest, which for these purposes include maintenance of public health or public order. Page 14, and only 4 more pages to go, folks. This one is a little bit more sinister than the previous pages. The powers of entry and to stop vehicles. The Coronavirus Act and coronavirus regulations do not explicitly confer any powers on police officers to stop vehicles or enter premises. Powers to stop vehicles. Police have powers to stop any vehicle for any reason under the Road Traffic Act 1988, Section 163. The Coronavirus Act 2020 has created certain offences that may be discovered upon officers stopping a vehicle. For example, a constable can stop a vehicle to ascertain the reasons for being out, and if they don't fall into any of the reasonable excuse categories, then they can be cited for committing an offence under the coronavirus legislation. So in other words, the police, rather than stopping you to check if you're breaking any of the coronavirus regulations, they will just stop you with the use of 163 of the Road Traffic Act. And then, a bit like they do when they stop you and all of a sudden can smell alcohol or can smell drugs in the car, to make another offence out of it, or to confirm their reason for stopping you. They can do the same here. It does say that use your judgment and common sense. For example, people will want to exercise locally and may need to travel to do so. We don't want the public sanction for travelling a reasonable distance to exercise. Road checks on every vehicle is equally disproportionate. We should reserve enforcement only for individuals who have not responded to engage, explain and encourage where public health is at risk. What this appears to be saying is that enforcement is applicable if you fail to engage with them. And that is completely against your human rights. You are under no obligation to talk to the police or anybody else for that matter, and you cannot be forced to talk to them. Entry into property. Police need a warrant before they can enter and search premises. However, the Coronavirus Act 2020 has provisions within it to cover the power of entry in certain exceptional circumstances. Schedule 21 of the Coronavirus Act allows an officer to enter a property where they have reasonable grounds to suspect that a person within is potentially infectious. Good luck with that. I can see all the police trying to scramble and get into a house where there may be an infected. And they need to direct or remove the person for screening and assessment. Officers must be sure. I love the way they go from constables to officers. Anyway, officers must be sure if it is both necessary and proportionate to enter a property under these grounds. They must confer with the public health officer unless it is not practical to do so due to exceptional circumstances. Page 15. What does the officer/PCSO need to do on the street? Number 1. The police officer or PCSO takes the decision that an offence has been committed under these regulations and a fine needs to be issued. So again, no need for proof, no need for evidence, just make a decision. Number 2, the officer/PCSO takes the details required for the fine on a standard form and reports the person for summons and gives them the now caution. Again, in my opinion, if you are completely silent throughout the whole interaction, and don't forget to record it yourself, but if you're completely silent throughout the entire interaction, there should be no reason why the police officer or PCSO can make a decision based on no information that you are committing an offence. Number 3, the encounter should be recorded on body-worn video where available and sufficient information obtained to provide a statement if the person fails to make payment. The officer/PCSO emails a copy of the standard form to a dedicated mailbox in ACRO. Number 5, everything else will be dealt with centrally and will only come back to the force if the person fails to make payment. Page 16, with just 2 pages to go. Safeguarding. We need you to be the professional decision makers on the street. What a joke that is. Keep an inquisitive, questioning mindset. It may not be safe for everyone to be at home. Consider whether there are any safeguarding issues at play. For example, are you dealing with aspects of domestic abuse, child abuse, or mental health? Be professionally curious. Do the checks and ask the questions. Find out what's really going on and inquire about the environment the person is living in. If home is not a safe place for the person to return to, we need to solve the problem in partnership. In these cases, do not utilise this legislation. Instead, revert to normal process and legislation dealing with vulnerable people. If you have issues with partnership working, escalate through the usual channels in your force. Page 17 and the final page. Personal safety. Wash your hands frequently, regularly and thoroughly clean your hands with an alcohol-based hand rub or wash them with soap and water. Wash hands or use sanitizer before going into any address and after exiting. Maybe an idea to ask them if they do turn up at your property if they have washed their hands and if they can prove it. I wouldn't like one of them coming into my property not knowing whether or not they've got germs on them. Maintain social distancing. Maintain a distance of at least 2 meters or 6 feet between yourself and anyone. Now, I'm pretty sure that means between their colleagues as well, unless it's impractical to do so, for example, if you're arresting somebody. However, let's make sure that we keep these people to account. Let's name and shame, get numbers, video record it, get your videos to me, let's get them up on the channel, let's name and shame, and that way when people see these police constables out on the street and they want to talk to them or anything else, they know that they need to be safe because they're not following the rules themselves. Avoid touching your eyes, nose and mouth. Practice respiratory hygiene. Make sure that you and the people around you follow good respiratory hygiene. This means covering your mouth and nose with your bent elbow or a tissue when you cough or sneeze. Dispose of the used tissue immediately. Doesn't say anything about washing their hands after doing that, which it should do. So remember, guys, if police are coughing, okay, then they're potentially spreading coronavirus, which is not good, and it needs to be addressed. So every interaction you have, get your camera out, get filming. Let's name and shame the people that are not following these regulations. Use the PPE equipment that your force has provided. We are making sure that stocks of PPE equipment are replenished and available for use. And there we go, guys. That is what they've been told. Now, there's some pretty scary parts in there. I've tried to explain what I can, although some of it is opinion. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. I would obviously like to hear your views on this. I will try and get hold of the document that came out or was due to come out today. If I can, I will make another one of these videos for you to see exactly what it is the police are being told. Because remember, this isn't the kind of stuff that we don't get told this. So I'm very, very lucky to have been able to get my hands on a copy of this. Because as I always say, we have to use the same rules against them that they use against us. That's the only tool that we have, okay, is to hold them account for the same practices that they're trying to enforce onto us. And that's the only way we can make sure that we remain safe. So if you have an interaction, any at all, the very first thing you do before even opening your mouth, if you want to open your mouth, is get your phone out. That's the only way that you are going to be able to back up, especially if you get given an arbitrary fine. Anyway, I hope this has been of some use to you. I apologise for the length of the video. I wanted to make sure that everybody, whether you can read it or whether you have to hear it, I wanted to make sure that everybody could know exactly what it is the police are being told and what their position is on what they can and cannot do. So don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. I would appreciate that. The more thumbs up, the more chance we've got of this getting out to more and more people. Comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to stay safe, look after each other, film the police and other officials. Good night, all. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you like the content and you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so. In the description of every video there are some links to ways that you're able to help support the channel so I can continue putting out content. If you're unable to help us in that way, hit that subscribe button up the top there. If you haven't already, become a subscriber. That is support enough. Share the videos, comment, like, it all helps. If you're looking for something else to watch, up top there is my latest video. Down the bottom there is a video that YouTube recommends for you.